Tani nga tso terang dana yung kanga tani nga tso terang kan chat nyang kanga mo tsangma la shizhu dela kan samzhi jiga yin.
Good afternoon to everybody who has come here today.
Tani nga terang shizhu nga tso chat ka nangdun da kang rezina tani gum gyabshir ka tani jirne ta langtong zaya tani ka rez.
And the topic for this afternoon's teaching is going to be related to Shamatha and insight meditation.
Tani gum gyabse jita nga tso ka tani semkam ka zhongdar she ligzrez.
So when we talk about meditation, what we are referring to is a kind of training for the mind.
Tani tangbo nga tso gum gyab gowi gyamsan da kang yente ha sarwoz tani ha korgo rez.
And what we first need to know is actually the reason why we are meditating or why we should meditate.
Tani nga tso shawa leka kang lena yang tani thomar nga tso nda le gowi gyamsan da kang re. Shawa leka nda lena tela tani mdrewa kang yo kare taga thomar nga tso ha korgo ya te rez.
Whatever kind of action we undertake or whatever kind of work we do, we first need to understand the rationale for doing it. And not only the rationale, but the result that we can achieve in doing this work.
Tani perna nga tso lipo zhongdar mashina, tani nga tso lipo ndela tani nat njata mandra mambo yunga re. Tani nat tela tani nga tso tsoa gana la dungar mambo yung, tani na tsa dungar mambo yung, tani matse yang yakbozi tani mayong, suso matse tani taga tondang dambazi tani shetab ka mareze perna nga tso lipo to zhongdar mashina.
So if we don't exercise our bodies, then we will easily become sick. And with sickness and illness, much suffering will result in our lives, we'll have much inconvenience, and it will prevent us from doing a lot of things.
Tani ti gyamsan da nga tso tsama tani hako yo re, hako yo ti tani nga tso mamambo ga tani zupo la zhongdar ndra mambo shek yo re.
So this is something that virtually everybody understands, and on this account most people exercise their bodies frequently.
Yena nga tso semkam ga tola tani zhongdar she goya ta nga tso mamambo zga hako yo marez.
However, the need to train one's mind is not something that as many people know about.
Tana nga tso mamambo zga tani zhongdar tani she ki yo ki te yang hako yo marez. Semkam go zhongdar zga tani zhongdar zga yo ya te yang nga tso mamambo zga hako marez. Nga tso semkam go zhongdar zga yo ki te yang yo pa te yang hako marez mamambo zga.
Even the fact that there is such a thing as training the mind is something that not many people know about, or not everyone knows about.
Te yindi nga tso mamambo zga tani nga tso semkam go zhongdar te la tani tongchong she ne tani langzho yo res.
And for this reason, many people do not attach much importance to the training of the mind.
Tani nga tso muze jita gandhi zila ziga yo res ne na nga tso muze ya te ngupo kang ka nga tso driba res na nga tso she te tani ngupo re, wembo re, she ka te tani sem res. Sem tang wembo nika la tani ki tsokpa te la tani nga tso muze ne tani maungta ka yo res.
So what does it mean, in fact, to be human? What is a person? A person is comprised of both a physical form, physical matter, and the mind. So we are a composite of both of these things.
Tani nga tso muze jita ngupo kyangpa yang mare, tani taga di sem kyangpa yang mare, tani ka tsokpa te yinpa te tani thomar nga tso tani ngunzan she go res.
We're not just our physical matter, and we're not just our minds. We are a fusion of both of these things, and what we need to do at the outset is recognize this fact.
Tani nga tso muze ya te ngupo tang sem nika ka tsokpa yindi, tani nga tso ngupo ka cha te la ngupo korang ka gumko chik tang. Tani nga tso sem te la sem korang ka gumko, tani gumko mandawa ni yo res.
So on account of the fact that we are comprised of our physical selves and our minds, we have needs in respect of both of these halves. So needs in respect to our physical form and needs in respect to our minds.
Tani nga tso zupo tini gungko the kangrezina perna zamata chida jota tini khawugta o teso tamchepo ngacho tini zupo ta wembo ngupo tini gungko res.
So our physical needs, the needs of our bodies, are things like the need for food, the need for drink, for sustenance, for clean air.
Teni teso mayona teni ngacho teni zupondo teni demo tabkamare zupondi tola dumur data manda mambo teni yungres gunko teso mena.
And if we are not able to fulfill these needs, then we will experience suffering in our bodies.
Teni sem tela yang tetang jawa zaka ngacho sem kham tela yang teni tetang jawa yang teni gunko mandawa yang chiyores.
And just as our bodies have their needs, so too do our minds have needs of their own.
Teni sem kham ka teni gunko ta kangrezina teni ngacho teni yang takpa ga tawa masoso la tawa la ndamanda mambo yore tinani tawa yang takpa gore ndashi yang takpa gore teni toso teni ngacho sem kham ka teni gunko res.
As for the needs of our mind, there are a variety of opinions, in fact, on what these are. But what we do need to arrive at is an accurate view of what our needs are and an accurate awareness of the needs of our minds.
Teni ngacho zupula goya teni zamatang teni chitang teni khawutang teso thamayang yo teni semkham la goya teni yang takba ga tawadang yang takba ga samlodang teso chama yo sona teni mukchik tazo mot teni dethang ga ngane ne thap kres.
It's only after we have satisfied the physical needs of our body, whether in respect of food, water, air, etc., and then the needs of our minds in terms of a proper understanding, proper views, and proper thoughts. When these both aspects are brought together, at this point, can we really talk about living healthily?
Teni teni kinani kang mena yang teni pena teni lipo gungko yakpo mena da teni semkham ga gungko yakpo mena da kang mena yang chik mena teni ngacho dethang ga ngane yarje sen ro watang choa ke ro watang to so shethap ko mare teni dungmar mambo yung gondos yung gres.
However, if one aspect of these needs is lacking, then we will not, in fact, be able to live in a happy and healthy manner.
Teni te ngacho khorang ga teni ngubo ga teni chunyet te ngubo khorang ga netser te teni ziri te ngacho tapadang rewa yo mare je pena ngacho te chushen kan ga chushe ta mashe ta yana nangba she ta yeshi she ta teni ga tapalam rewa yo mare kangkanglam rewa yo mare khono ngubo rang ga netser te teni ziri ngacho tapa shinkan zgi na mogli te teni ziri tapa machine kan zgi na teni ziri yana nangba yenare teni to yeshi yenare.
So characterizing the human like this in respect of its various needs is something that is just a fact or the basic essence of what a human is. It's not a religious characterization. It doesn't rely on having a particular religious faith, whether it be Buddhist or Christian or otherwise. It's an objective statement of what it means to be human.
Teni ngachu tarta teni ngachu choa nangla teni dungmer mambo zu yung gundu jite so thamche po choa nangla dungmer dramanda mambo yore te lipo kyang wa ga yang mare sem kyang wa ga yang mare kap sang ngachu lipo gungko yak bo me bigim sen ji teni dungmer yung gundu kap sang ngachu teni sem kham ga thola teni sem kham gun do pa te yak bo kong ma tha pa In
the course of our everyday lives, we experience all manner of sufferings. They're not necessarily exclusively physical sufferings or mentally derived. Sometimes when we don't or are unable to fulfill our physical needs, we experience suffering in this regard. And sometimes when we're not able to satisfy the desires of our minds, we also come upon suffering.
Tini chapartang aso tini perna tastan rawo inna tini aso chisoko tini chowa ngubu chowa te yargi tini sonyo pa tini kabinna tini aso dungur mangchi ata tini sem go tore yong dungur teres.
But in the current day, when we live in a state of relative material affluence, most of our suffering does in fact derive from the suffering of our mind.
Tani ngama nekamna nguma razina tini ngubogun sowa yargi maswa ti nekam razina tini sem gatola yang dumur yo ta na mambo zut tini nga so ta lipo dumur rez ngama ina.
In eras gone by, when we did not enjoy the same standard of living that we do today, then whilst we did, of course, have experienced mental suffering, a lot of our the pain that we encountered was due to physical suffering.
Tani nga so mamang chewa za ko wang shina roa mir ko lorji ko wang shina mamang chewa za ko wang shina perna tambo lig dumur tini zaje me pa konji me pa te so mambo yong tani zaje konji te so yopi jini ta sem go toni dumur mambo yong tani shine tani shirtang mir ko lorji la tini zire lorji mandawi ne kamna dumur mandawan duze.
In general, looking at the course of human history, it has tended to be the case that people began with suffering related to their physical lives. And then as their needs for food and clothing were satisfied, the mental suffering began to increase. So with different stages in human history, different sufferings or kinds of suffering have ensued.
Tani machchig lam so na zenga so roa mir zeni tani mashit machchig lam so na machchig so wa na la na te dang ra bore be na kap sing aso semkham gu dungur da mambo yore kap tani lig dungur da tani mambo dos.
So even in respect of an individual, one person, this is how things operate. From time to time we will have more mental suffering, and other times we will experience more physical suffering.
Tindi indi pena nga so musti na pena hwanjur ko tini chakin te tini te chobo tindi yimbi nerkam na tini ta lidang lig dumur tini mambore tini pamjur ko chakin te yar yakpo chaksarwi jini tini semtok ko dumur ta mambore.
So during times when we are not in the most flourishing of economic circumstances, we may experience physical suffering, but after we've resolved our situation in this regard, then mental suffering will begin to multiply.
Tini tinji dumur tela tini nga so ina musdang si na te nga so sama tini dumur tela ha chang chakayo re tini di dumur te para mepa sheya ga tondagla tini aso tini ju shawa lekan ramra mambo pe na rigni mambo tini laksar mambo tini samlo mambo to so sama dumur to so par mepa sheya ga to tondagla tini sama ga tini samlo mambo tari samlo mambo chun tini rawa sar chun shi tini laksar mambo tini sar to chi tini rawa ga tini shawa mambo le ndiyate aso dumur to so mepa ga tondagla res.
But these kinds of suffering, or suffering in general, is something that humans really fear. And in order to stave off or get rid of this suffering, humans have engaged in all kinds of endeavors, whether it be inventing all kinds of new technologies, studying all kinds of cultural pursuits, all of these things engaged in with the purpose of eliminating this suffering.
Tini yina nga tsu tini dumur te tan par mepa shepa ga tapshi ti tola tini nga tsu ruwa mirik zinanda nga tsu mamang chishu zika ti tola tini nonchar halipa chenpo shi yores.
However, generally speaking, in terms of a method for eliminating suffering, the majority of people are very mistaken in what they believe, in what they regard the effective method to be.
Tini nonchar te kang rezena nga tsu mamang chewa zika samlo tangpaya na nga tsu dumur te tsangma te tini ta shirur ne pe na nga tsu la chu ngupo me panda ota yana pamjur me panda ota yana katak nyantak me panda ota yana thup gosa me panda ota wangcha me panda ota tini shirur ke tini sar nga tsu la dumur te yung ndig samne nga tsu mamang chewa zika te sam go yore nga tsu dumur mambo yoya ga gimtsin te tsangma shirur na yore samne. And
this mistaken idea lies in the view that most of our suffering comes from external factors around us. So a lack of riches, a lack of power, a lack of status, or whatever it might be. Most people attribute their suffering to causes and factors in the world around them.
Teni tenji ge samlo to yo charti teni nga cho teni soso la dungur moyong wa tang dewa yong I tond teni shoror kana ngubo mangbo pamjuri chim yarge saptang ngubo mangbo sak tin rawota teni soso wo teni mangchak nyanchak teni to jepi thawla chonje da teni soso wo teni thop kosa ta teni yo I tondakla teni nga cho shoror la leka mambo le yores.
So based on this idea that suffering comes from the external world, most people, in order to address this suffering on this level, engage in accumulating riches, in achieving high status or fame. In short, they direct their energies precisely to this external world.
Tani shir nga cho dumur mambo zo to shir ne yong yo orezina yong yo re rete nga cho tani dumur chama shir ne yong yo sambi samlo to
Of course, this is not to say that none of our suffering arises from the world, the external factors around us. Of course it does. However, to think that this is in fact the entire source of our suffering is very mistaken.
Tini te norwag chigreze, norwag nipa de kangreze na tini nga cho mangchi ga ka samlo ta na nga cho chowa na la yo pi dingmur ra mandra mambo yo pa te tak thamche po mar mepa she ata dungur ta thachu she pala teni nga cho shurur ke teni pe na gormo mambo yo anda ta sosola thup gosa chimbo yo anda wangcha yo ba tendis yo na teni nga cho dungur ta thachu she thup kare samni nga cho tendi tak tak la thapsi tendi tak tak la samlo tang de teni yang ten chwa chigre ten de norwa ni pa de reason chwa ni pa de reason.
So the first mistake is the idea that suffering is derived from the external world around us, things in our external lives. And then the second mistake is based on this first mistaken view that the way of going about addressing this suffering, getting rid of it, is to work at the level of factors in our external world too. So amassing wealth, achieving status, and engaging in efforts like this.
Teni ton ngoma tholapsha na nga cho teni li tang sem gi dungur te ni soso yewa shine teni nga cho she gore teni li tang sem ge dungur ni khaka yendi teni li ki dungur me pa tang sem gi dungur me pa she pa ga thapsi te ya thapsi susu yo gore thapsi chig yong go mares.
However, what we need to do is to distinguish, in fact, the needs, our physical needs, and distinguish between these needs and the needs of our mind, our psychological needs. There are solutions and methods appropriate to each of these needs. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach to both.
Teni nga cho li ki dumur teni me pa she ala ten pe nga cho teni chu so go te shawale ka drup chu chung jap ji na da le ka le ji na da to so la tin ni teni nga chu teni chu chowa ga chakin to so teni chakin to so tham chu po teni drup ji to teni nga chu li ki dumur to me pa she thap kres.
So in terms of addressing our basic needs for survival and doing work, doing some business, making some money, ensuring our conditions are in place, this is a way for addressing our physical needs.
Tani ta sem go dungur tinju me pa she gona tani yang thapsi jamba chi go re je to ti thapsi jamba ta kang re je na tani nga cho gum jab ke ta sem kum go jondr she ke tere.
However, in terms of addressing the needs of our mind, we need a different method. And this method is meditation, training our minds.
Tani mang chi shu tu nga cho dungur mang chi shu tu tini nga cho chirwa la tenim jong yore norwa tang chirwa ga sam lo chi la tenim jong dos.
Most of our suffering really comes from mistaken thoughts and illusions in our mind.
Tani nga cho chwa ga na la namgin tini nga cho tini to nga chu tani samlu mang chi shu zu tani to chirwa re tin chirwa tele par gar matna tani dungur te cho chawa ne me pa she pa tani de she thog mares.
Since most of the suffering in our lives stems from these mistaken thoughts, then without being able to transcend these kinds of thoughts, it will be very difficult for us to move beyond our suffering.
Tini terang acho tari semkham ko jongder tini gum tini namba tamche bola tini ngochu she ke yen ngochu she kitila rimba ni yoze gum mandawa ni ngochu she ke yen.
So today we're going to talk about meditation as a method for addressing the needs of the mind, and I'm going to talk about two levels of meditation.
Tani ti nani chit kangrezena ngachon choa ga nangla tini so sem marke patang sem nangla dumar mamboshon perna tonser kan ta yana tele jamba ga tini to kherkyang ga tini samlo kherkyang ga nadra ta tini na mambo zu tini yongo yo te marme pa shi yare je chigda gom chigda.
So the first type of meditation I'm going to talk about is one that can be applied in the course of our everyday lives when unhappiness arises, or for people who suffer from depression, feelings of loneliness.
Tini ti gom tela tini ngacho manche az ka tini tamba nyirja ka gom zegendu tini amarkala tarkib chimbon ro ndu lobda chimot sogona la tela jimjing mambo shegendu maung bana tele kyang tarkib chimbon ro sares.
This kind of meditation is frequently referred to as mindfulness meditation. This has become very popular in the United States, and in the future is probably likely to become even more widespread.
Teni ti gomda teni tarta teni ta ngacho lobda chimbona la jimjing shegendu teni tandawaz ka teni ta mambo zu ka teni nyamli nyam shegendu ze te hale ba yakbore te na ngacho teni man thone penatini sem marke pada teni yong ne kamna teni man thone teni ta sem chongz teni kebo yong ata teni she ke yore ta te thapsi mare yakbo mare je tele gum jabna ha chang yakbo yore.
So this kind of meditation is currently being researched a lot in universities. It's being widely practiced, and this is a good thing. It's certainly more preferable to taking medicine when we are in a state of mental discomfort. However, there are certain insufficiencies in respect of this meditation practice. It's not possible to say that this kind of meditation will be able to completely eradicate our suffering.
Teni dungar te chimbo chomar dungar chongchong she garezi dungar chongchong she jokore teni dungar chongchong re sona teni dungar te yo na ya nga chu teni sem kana la teni nyong thap kumare je teni dungar to chongchong ma to mena te nga chu sem kana la dungar te nyong ma thap teni saro me pa teni chang ro teni z ti gom ta she thap garezi ti gom ta nga chu dungar chechong la tong garezi chongchong re do re dungar tsawani me pare kamar dungar chongchong re ro re dungar to chongchong re sona teni nga chu sem kana la dungar to nyong thap kumare je ti chora ta saro yo mare dungar to me pa ro re.
This kind of meditation is able to reduce the severity of our feelings of suffering. So it's able to make a feeling of severe suffering become less severe in the way that we perceive it. It's not able to completely eradicate suffering at the root, but it is able to reduce the intensity of our feeling of suffering.
Pena cho borum go khoa ngarmu pena porwa kang nangla teni cha chongz nyong zu lugna teni cha ga teni trowa ti nangla yo re ta nga chung thong ne kamna nga chu ngarmu da ma to pa teni cha ga trowa ta nyong thok ko mare pena ten da boris.
So it's like if we had a bowl of sweet soup and in it we put a tiny pinch of salt. When we drink the soup, even though there is a little bit of salt in it, because of the overwhelming taste of sugar, we wouldn't really taste it very strongly.
Teni dungar ni pa te kangrezena nga chu dungar te gum ni pa te kangrezena dungar me pa she ke gum ni pa te kangrezena teni nga chu dungar sama chawa ni me pa she ya teni gum jamba chigres.
So this being the first kind of meditation, the second kind of meditation, this one oriented to eradicating suffering at its root.
Tani ti dungmur ti gom ti niki nangni gom tangbo tani nga chu chula tapa shimkhani na gom chokore chula tapa mashimkhani na gom chokore tenda was ka penda nangba inna gom chokore yangna nangba mayim batini ta tan zambalang ka chulu jamba zala tapa shimkhan ji na yang gom chokore te chama ti sis ka gom na gom chokore.
And this kind of meditation is something that can be practiced by anyone, regardless of whether they're a Buddhist or they have another religious faith.
Tani gom te saskai na tani gom na gom chokore ta ina ti gom te yinjin nangba gare zi nangba ga tani zhonga na la shapa zi ta ina tani ta jamba so gom na gom chokore zi.
So this kind of meditation, even though anyone can practice it regardless of their background, is derived from the Buddhist tradition. It's a Buddhist meditation.
Tani nangba mayim ba tani jamba namla tani gom yo re zi ngama penda jagr ke chulung da ota ta sola gom tani yo re ta tarta nga chu mambo ku sha deyati tarta nga chu mambo zi ke tani shucho ko thola tani chama ga tani lobta chimo tan da so jimji she tani she yo sa gom te nga chu nangba gom zi re ta ina te gom na tani nangba mayim na te gom chokore.
Meditation is not purely something in the Buddhist tradition. The Hindu tradition also has meditation traditions. However, the kind of meditation we're talking about now, and the one that is being researched widely in universities, is a Buddhist meditation tradition, even though, of course, it can be practiced by anyone.
Tani gom nipate tani karte gom gona tani ta nangba mashina tani nangba shini nangba yang the so ramba jin the nangba nangla nyamlim shia mambo yore te so nyamlim mashina tani shetham kumare tani gum karte nipate gum gona tani nangba mashina tani gum thap manduze gum nipa na nangba sanji ba she gore mashina gum ki yo mareze gum nipate namba tambo to sama sa gom na chokoreze tini nipa tini ta namba machina tini gom gyo mareze tomba ni kitawa ta zoba chimbo te sore.
That's all. Okay, so I made a mistake. I'm sorry. The first kind of meditation is one that can be practiced by anyone irrespective of their background. The second kind of meditation is one that requires becoming a Buddhist and having Buddhist goals in one's practice.
Tani ka ramba ni obati nani tani kangi nanda nga chu tani thomar nga chu hak kor goya de kang rezina nga chu chua nana yo pi tani dingmar mambo yong yo ate nga chu samna shilog ne yong yo sambi dingmar te chu mambo zu tu shilog ne mare nga chu rang sem ga nani yong doze.
So first of all, what we need to understand for the first stage of this meditation is that all of this suffering that we have commonly attributed to coming or deriving from the outside world is in fact produced by our minds.
Tani sem ga nani yong ga doze ate jim kandila zegare zena sem ga nani yong ze ate dingmar mambo zu tu ngarang cho nam tok ko wang ga tini yong ga doze nam tok ko wang ga yong yore nzamba ga wang ga yong yore sin nzamba ta nam tok zena chikpare ti nani ti wang ga yong ga doze.
And when we say that this suffering comes from our minds or results from the mind, what we mean that it is the result of various mental constructs and attachments that we have.
Shirtang tini nga cho dewa yan nanda, dumur yan nanda, dewa tang dumur ziki to kandis la ngunzin go rezina, te nga cho moga tini chorwa, moga nga cho moga li tang sem ko chorwa manda waz rezi, chorwa zila zi go rezi.
When we are differentiating between what is pleasurable and what's suffering, in fact, how we really do this it really is us distinguishing on the basis of feelings in our minds or in our bodies.
Tani chorwa ta nyamsum nyungkhan ta sik nyung yoreze pe na nga cho lipola tani orma da tin shina tani chamo ta namo tinti chorwa ta yongore ti chorwa ta nyamsim yongkhon ta se nyamsim yongore zina tini nga cho shiba ga nyamsim yong yore ji shiba.
When, for example, various feelings occur to us, or when we perceive different feelings, then we ask, in fact, who is it or what is it that is perceiving these feelings? For example, if we incur an injury, a wound, we have a feeling of pain or stinging. In that case, what is it or who is it that is perceiving this feeling? Well, it's our consciousness, it's our sensorial consciousness.
등물 명다 맘용세지 대화 명다 맘용세지 뜻더니 가서 시바래 드니 시바가 코랑 그 냠용 소로아즈라 대화다 등물에서 오래 마도 바 대화다 등물에서 실로라 요파즈 말해지.
So these feelings of happiness or unhappiness, pleasure or displeasure do not objectively exist in the world outside. They are feelings that our perception attributes to different experiences we have.
드니 가서 따따가 드니 런탕가 따완더 드니 런탕가 따와 신실로바즈레지 디 나데라 망치와도 신실로바레 가서 런탕가 따와딜라 지르주 마브지브나 니 런탕가 따와티 가서라 등물 하장 mambo 드니 등물 mambo 드니 끼디용 그레스.
Value systems these days are frequently very mistaken, and in fact, if we don't make reform to our values, then we will generate only more suffering for ourselves.
드니 가서 소화가 나니 등물 mambo도 가서 다니 런탕가 따와딜라 지르주주 잡으시나 드니 가서 소화가 나그 등물 mambo즈도 메바창도 오레지.
If we are able to make changes at the level of our values, then in fact much of the suffering that we usually experience can be eliminated.
드니 디 나니 드니 런탕가 따와티 등물 간리께 근도즈나 카시즈 가서 드니 직틴더 베나 가서 마임바즈라 임반라오 드니 그 노르와가 따와 신실로바 드니 그 또그 드니 용근도즈.
Some of our suffering, for example, derives from the fact that in the world around us we imagine things to be a certain way when they are not.
드니 마시 비김슨지 용거래서 가서 대코랑 가서 마임바즈라 인삼네 드니 종와당 돈짓 우보 닐그제고나 우보 코랑 야보즈 마시 비김슨지 드니 가서 셈가나라 등을 mambo 용거도세.
It's because we really don't understand the true nature of things and how they operate that we cling to ideas of things in fact existing when they don't, and on account of this we experience suffering.
Pena ngacho tinir mulum ter miwi nekamna mulum mujimbi nekamna ngacho karti mulum yamba mashina teni mulum ganala teni ter ngacho thongi teni ngupo thamchibo ngacho la teni kapkaps dewa ta kepa ke kare kapkaps jikchak ta dingmur ke kare teni chuwa ga ta chikpa chikyang rese.
So as in a dream, if we don't realize that we're dreaming, then all the things that happen to us we treat as real. So they may alternatively bring us happiness and pleasure, or at other times fear and unhappiness. Just as a dream operates, in fact, so does our everyday life.
Teni ngacho mulum mo nekabna mulum yimba de shisona teni ta dungmur chama teni ta lamsang tema tak ta menro ndozi jikchak da dungmur da teso chama tema tak ta menro ndozi mulum de yimba kha go sona.
If when we realize that our dream is just a dream, then any suffering that it has caused or any fear that it has caused immediately disintegrates, it disappears immediately.
Teni ngacho mulum zikita dan chowa zikindini ke khabar ta kangrezena ticho thongthong tela thongthong jang tini mulum tela ngacho tini tela tini mulum zegare ticho techo rambo jang tini ta mulum tela teni ngacho chowa zegare je ti khabar ticho rangthong ma to khabar yo mare.
How are we to understand the difference between a dream and our everyday lives? Only in terms of the length of time. A dream is something that usually takes place over a relatively short period of time, whereas our everyday lives are something that are rather long in duration.
Tani pena terang ngachon nyam dendelan dendi sokhang zkanalan tsogni tani ngachon dendi khabda shi ko ban chatch shi ko ban de mulum reta ngacho dendi mulum zmi go yoreta yana ngubo tong ko thola dendi yoreze gona ripi jongl ko thone tini ya shi gona hale pa shi kamores.
So the fact that we are gathered here in this church this afternoon listening to a teaching from the point of view of from the theoretical point of view, if we are to ask whether or not this is a dream or in fact whether or not this is really happening, it would be in fact quite difficult to answer that.
Yeah. Ini ya sih kemarin kan so pernah tadi nanang kelola tani tong cuci kelola tani jana ke Jungko tani lobja cimosi ke tani jiksho kenala jik tani jiksho kenala tani ngaso tarta gende ngaso malum reta tani ngaso unso arezi tani ke tani jiksho zutni tani loma chola tani lan jab tani chigi oreze tani zeng doze tani jab tab kemareze.
In 2014, high school students taking an exam in China were given the essay topic, is this a dream or not? And weren't able to respond to this question. And the students didn't pass this essay.
Yeah. Teni lo nish sabdan sabje tidis ko kongror teni ngacho teni lama yujin noro teni ngarang chola teni twa korang gusum teni sti gyamne teni tela lan gyab sho sone teni de ngacho tarta malum reta ngacho teni chuare sone teni zum chi gyabare teni ngacho mambo samlo tani choa imbi gimts mambo shate teni gimts chi kyang gimts ngomaz chi kyang Shamatha bares.
Oni shi sa ke ngona. About 27 or 28 years ago, Lama Ishi Nobo or Kempo Jimmy Punso Kempo's root teacher composed some writing on this question of whether it right now is a dream or in fact it's really everyday life, and gave it to the students. They contemplated it for a long time, and he asked them to respond to this, to provide their own opinions and reasons. Many of them tried to come up with all kinds of reasons as to why, in fact, this present moment was real. However, none of them were convincing.
Yeah. Teni ngacho nyangma teni lama mpham jamgun mpham rambochi ji yore teni khorang ga teni song na la yang ngacho or mulum dang teni ngacho chuani ka chobaz gyab yore je chobaz gyamni mulum ga jena ngarang demba yense teni chowa ga jena ngarang demba yen kyo jambare jene teni chobaz gyab yore teni thabji jigta nit teni ta jambare ro je ma to ta ngarang demba yen bi gimchins
Jamgum Minpa Rinpoche penned his thoughts on this question, characterizing a debate between real life and a dream. And real life was claiming, this is true, this is really happening. And the dream claimed, no, this is a dream, I am right. And they argued back and forth. But at the end of the day, neither was able to produce convincing reasons as to whether they were true or not. So at the end of it, both appeared as false.
Teni indi ta ngacho teni mjingthar teni ngacho teni te domsik de kare jena jelwan domsik de kare jena pena machisi ka teni lo jathamba ka teni nga chu machisi ka nyamnyung te teni chitsuni ga nala teni thong shi jana teni tela malam ze gores jelun jana jingjera waya teni te nga chu mochi ka teni machi chi pena lo jathamba yena lo jathamba ga teni nyamnyung machi ga nyamnyung te chitsuni ga nala teni div jana chong yu jana yaso teni shi jana teni tela malam ze gores.
So, in conclusion, we can say that if the contents of 100 years of human life were condensed into 2 hours, this could be called a dream.
Teni chitsu ni na la shong teni malam te nga so rambo shi ni lo ja tham ba shi jana teni tela matse ze go gres.
And if we were able to extend these 2 hours out into the length of a lifetime, then we could call this life.
Teni tema to ka chapar chi yo mare nga so chapar she go na she thap ko mare nga to nyamnyung ko go ni she thap na she thap ko mare ripi jong lu ko jimsung ko to ni she go na she thap ko mare.
So, with the exception of the length of time in question, there is no difference between everyday life and dream. There's no difference that we can assert in terms at the experiential level or at the level of argument or theory.
Teni ta nga chu malam te nga chu mchama ga teni shena teni zimbare ze kharang demba mari zimbare ze ni teni nga chu chama ga teni sha ka yore nga chu chama shi gre.
Many people say that dreams are false, they're not true.
Ya teni nga chu shi gre ta yinna yang teni ta te nga chu malam ga nang ni sar cha cha pi ji su teni nga chu ko zimbare ze ni teni ze gre ma to ba nga chu malam mu jin bi ne kam na nga chu zimba yamba ti shi yo mare.
However, it's only after we wake up from the dream that we say, oh, that's false. While we're still in the dream, we do not have this idea at all.
Teni malam te zimba yamba ti nga chu chama ha ko yo re nga chu same ke yang leng gre te yinna yang teni nga chu malam de zimba yamba ma shi na teni malam ka nga chu la dingmar mambo njiktak ta dingmar mambo ke yong nda wa ze.
So even though everybody knows that dreams are not true, if while we are dreaming we don't know this, then dreams bring us all kinds of suffering and all kinds of fear.
Teni yendi teni nga chu ta dingmar mambo ze ta nga chu dingmar ramra mambo ze ta teni ta yong yo re ta ti yong sa ta gani yong yo teni nga chu ha ko re ze teni samlo ta na dingmar gum jong khong ta kain ta nga chu ha ko re.
So we need to isolate or identify, in fact, what the source of our suffering is.
Teni kandi teni wana ta dungur ta kandi yong gand zena nga chu ngupu kang dang kang yin na da khorang tong go thola demba yin na da khorang tong go thola zimba yin na da ngarang chu tela demba re samni sim go thoni zimba ha chang chimbo shi jana teni ti dungur ke yong re.
And what the source of this suffering is, the source of this suffering is our tendency to grasp onto things, whatever they may be, as being intrinsically true.
Teni ngarang chu pena lakpa go ngupo chilan teni tambo shini teni zong jana teni ngupo da nga chu lakpa nang ga shit chimbo zo teni ten sona nga chu zummo da chan de khashi mashina nga chu zummo chat do res zummo khashi mashina pena nga chu teni to ngupo den da was lakpa na lan ji ona teni to lakpa go dumni teni ji ona ndo jamba kan ten sona Okay,
so it's like if we're tightly grasping onto something, tightly holding it with our hands. If we are to suddenly pull our hands away, then without opening our hands, we won't be able to remove it from the object.
Yeah. Dini tinda was a pena ngato so rang la yo pi wang cha yen nanda, so go teni jo pamjur yen nanda. Teni so go top tang yen nanda, teni mambo ngarang so sim ganani hal lepan teni tambo shini teni zung yores.
Whether it be our riches or status or fame, these are things that we typically cling to very tightly in our minds.
Teni inna teni ngaso pamjori nanda teni wangcha tang pamjor tang teni lipo teni zupo detang tang deso tamjepo teni kapsu teni ngaso lagna ni par tonggoya da ngaso la teni rawa mepa ga toni ngaso ta par kaptan doa teni yores.
However, there are times when we need to let go, as it were, of our clinging, our grasping to these things, whether it be our attachment to riches and status or our physical health or our bodies.
Teni di kapsa ngaso sem parteni kapshi shigo reze sem kapshi shigo re matoba gate sem kamashini sem gatarong de shini zona teni dungar halipa chimbo sem kanala yongore sem kanala teni dungar mambo teni kapsi yongores.
So it's when we actually lose our grasp of these things that our minds need to open like our hands. If we continue to cling at times like this, then we will experience great suffering.
Teni sem para kapshia tila ti tapshi tila teni gum nipa tereze ngaso terang shati gum nipa te tereze.
And the method for opening our minds or letting our minds go at this time is the second kind of meditation.
Teni ngaso terang shati gum tambo tang gum nipa re gum niti nani gum tambo te teni peda ngaso chowa ga nani leka ga nani shongis non shing jata kapse sem market pata. So the
first kind of meditation that I spoke about this afternoon was a kind of meditation that we can use in moments where we have a lot of pressure or stress as a way to reduce these feelings.
Teni tambo te na ta ne teni ta nga su yang nyamlin shi na pantok yore su sem la pantok yore ti gomu ni pote hajang ga teni karchim bores.
So whilst this first kind of meditation certainly can bring us benefit, the second kind of meditation is able to eliminate our suffering completely at the root, and it is an amazing kind of meditation.
Teni tambo gom tambo tenge teni ndodiz shakins.
I'm going to briefly speak about the first kind of meditation.
Teni gum tambo tela ngaso teni da tapshi shirtang tapshi haliba teni mambo yorese gum gyablik tela mambo zindose.
In respect of this first kind of meditation, there are many different techniques available that can be used.
Shirtam zambalang teni ta chuluk soso gangda gangla yena teni gum japchar teni soso la rang soso gum japchar mandrawa teni yosares.
In the world today, among different religious traditions, there are each tradition has their own respective kinds of meditation.
Yena teni gum japchar ka teni tapshi chi mangshu ta njamra haliba mambo yosata teni namba ga
However, the tradition with the most diverse and numerous forms of meditation is the Buddhist tradition. And within the Buddhist tradition, the Tibetan tradition in particular has a vast spectrum of meditation practices.
Teni boba bobjin nangtang ganala teni gom mangshuin bi gemsen ka rezena teni bobjin nangtang ganala sang ka teni to chu ngazupe na teni ja chuta teni ngazu nyantu chuta tso ngala maybe teni sang mambo ziores.
And the reason for this richness in meditation approaches is due to the fact that the Tibetan tradition is the Vajrayana tradition.
Teni ti sang ka na tela teni to thapsi yang gom gyabl ka thapsi nga cho pe na shirtang ka teni thakba chimbo ta teni nyantu ko thakba te so na la mashi pi sha mipi teni yang gom thap ha le pa mambo ti na la ndoze.
So within the Vajrayana tradition, there are many kinds of meditation that not in the Sutric, the Mahayana Sutric tradition, or in the Theravadan traditions.
Teni ti gum te sola tini ti thapshi te sola tini teni tani nga so to dungur de mepa she gore te yena ti na ne thapshi te la nga so chikte nerkums tini nga so namba main na pe na nga so namba la tapa machine khan o tindi yana chulug la saw ne tapa men khan zi na namba thapshi te khorang ka pe shu she na dik ndu zi nerkums.
For the time being, or for temporary benefit, it is possible for people who are not Buddhists to make use of these approaches.
Teni chipote teni ta ta ngone chane namba shine korang arang namba yinze teni namba ga chutu so ramba jin da chama de nyamlim shine teni ro go res. Ni ba da.
The second of this, or the first kind of meditation, is the kind that anybody can appropriate. The second kind requires Buddhist faith and then following a graduated and progressive path of meditation practice.
Teni na teni ta namba ga nani gum chupu mari namba ga tawa ta namba ga teni gum ta teni namba ga teni jamba ga teni rentang ka tawa ta so chama cha chang zi. The
second kind of meditation requires that not just the practice of the actual meditation practice itself, but also an embrace of Buddhist attitudes and values and views.
Teni gum tambo te yinna teni nga cho namba ga tawa ta gomba ta teni jamba chama tanglim shi go mare khorang ti nani namba ga thapshi chingda ni da teni zi teni khorang ga gang khona ti nyamlin shi ni teshi jangna chokore jamba te so khorang nyamlin mapshi na chokore.
But the first kind of meditation doesn't require the acceptance of a wholesale acceptance of Buddhist views and values. It's appropriate to extract, as it were, a couple of effective approaches or methods from the Buddhist tradition and put these into practice.
Teni tambo te ga pe na nga so chulug la tapa machine khan yin na da chulug ta tapa shin khan yin na sedang se yin na yang teni di thapshi to khorang ka semla phan thong ro re je ko tapa yo na me na semla phan ko yongdir chi ya ga thapshi zu re teni ti phan thong ro re.
So the first kind of meditation is a kind of training that simply brings benefit to the mind, and it will bring benefit to the mind regardless of the faith or religious background of the person practicing it.
Pena yoga ta vareze pena yoga inna teni tambo ti jagar ke chuluk korang nyamlin zereze inna ti jini teni nga so chulula ta pa yong men kan mambo teni korang so lipu teni dethang ga tondala teni nyamlin she yore te shina chokore pena ten ra boreze.
It's rather similar to yoga, which originally was a practice in the Hindu tradition, but over time became a physical practice that spread all over the world, and it's a practice from which many people gain physical benefit.
Tanita gum kang in nanja te la shetang asu namba gana la tini gum jablik mambo shayore ta ni terang dini asu gum tambo da nipa nipo ta tabde pos nyung tini ngotu shikins.
So in the Buddhist tradition, there are many different meditation techniques and methods, some in greater detail and less, but today I'm going to describe in relation to the first and second kinds of meditation a very practical and simple meditation methods.
Tani namgin ngacho tini chowa nala ngacho simti tini ta namtok te halibandri namtok mambodri yong yore namtok ti kachik yang tini ndukmare simti tini perna jamchu la tini rlap chimbo yo pata wazre ngacho simti.
Usually our minds experience all kinds of distracting thoughts. They arise in our minds like waves in an ocean.
Teni ngacho jamchu rlap phajang chimbo tini to yongwa ta ngacho simti nala tini ramra yangna kap sa hajang gachiwa yangna kap sa hajang chim dugba tenri mambo de yongna teni ti teni ngaso sem mara teni ne matapa sim jiwa yong matapa tenri regere teni ti topko teni ngaso sem kanala mabdiwa mambo yongre machpa.
So just like waves in an ocean, we often feel surges of extreme happiness. We also feel surges of extreme unhappiness, and it's due to these different surging feelings that we are unable to experience calmness in our minds. And on account of not being able to feel this calmness, we experience suffering.
Tani tarang aso gum tela nipa kantin rizina teni gum gathavish tela teni ngaso namtok teni chimbo yopate teni mar jechong se tanin teni jechong la tong gores.
So really what we are attempting to do by the first kind of meditation is to reduce the size of these waves or surges of feelings or thoughts in our minds.
Teni tama ngaso teni sem ganala namtok teni yar namtok ramada kiwate meni teni par sem teni ne sakchi gatola tukching rabo tola ne thamsona teni tela sem tela journey zegre sem jemo jiwa ngala ne thapkres.
And after extended practice, when we are able to bring these surges of distracting thoughts, to reduce them in their intensity, gradually reducing them until they become like a flat line. When we reach this stage, then we can say that we have reached a stage of calmness or equanimity.
Teni ta tinji gone ngaso wona ngaso semte teni tangbo tarta ngaso semte haleba teni namtok mambore teni namtok te chechong sone namtok meba tinji shegona tela thapsi kangayozena teni thapsi tela gumtham jamandawar guyores.
So in terms of reducing these turbulent, distracting thoughts in their intensity, there are 9 concrete methods.
Teni ti thapsi mandawar guti teni ngaso gum tambo teni ngunzbane teni gumte teni yakboz teni mjigzongro warka teni nekapte chama teni tinalan diores ti gutinalan diores.
And these 9 methods encompass the stages from when we begin our meditation and until we bring it to its conclusion.
Teni ti gupote nekap mandawar gupote ngaso perna bog chu nala inna bojit namtang nala inna ti gupote remo lamni tini ta bojit namtang da jaela yore jaga chan ziti nala ti nipo ti tini remo la tini ngotu shek yore remo tini.
These different 9 stages within a meditation or within a meditation, a session of meditation practice in both the Tibetan and Chinese traditions are depicted in visual format. They're shown in pictures.
Teni jaga nala inna jaga teni chang nala teni ti remo go tela teni alang gi remo zegere alang zena walang ge remo ze jaga jiu niu tu ze ti zok doma ge teni remo ze kere teni zge tone ngotu shekendose.
In the Chinese Chan tradition, these 9 stages are depicted as the 9 oxes, sorry.
Yeah, teni boba nala teni ti jene gomsert teni chigda lambo chich ta xiang lambo chigda teni chaba chig o tso simgo teni goni teni ngoto shek yores chig monk zero.
Oh, okay, the first being a monkey, the second being an elephant.
Chig lambo che teni mo. Yeah, jaba.
Oh yeah, and a monk. These are the three ways that these 9 stages are portrayed in the Tibetan tradition.
Teni ti ramba gu goni teni to nekap tambo ni pasamba teni gu goni teni ngotu shek yore zinga so bogi kana tangana la.
So within the Tibetan tradition, these different moments or different stages within a meditation session are depicted in these nine stages.
Teni ti nani ge nani ngacho nge terang kang shaken zena tambuk sum to shaken ze ge nani.
And what I'd like to talk about today are the first of these three stages.
Teni ngarang cho tambu teni gum jam kang ge le tambu ba teni zi yenna teni ti gebo nani Shamatha su te halipa kar chimbo mare ngama sambo te kar chimbo res.
The most important among these 9 stages are the first 3 of them, especially for someone embarking on the practice.
Teni tambo sum ge nani tambu te la kang ze ge zena njokpa ze ge ze ngacho borke ke nala njokpa ze. Njokpa ze na kari njokpa ze na chis ke ton da ze na ngacho gum jam na perna ngarang ge sem ge nala teni martak bandao yana teni chu ta ngupo kang dang kang ze teni sam nam rang ge sem te ti thola par jagni teni ni na perna ngarang ge mu ke teni shang loma zla tani nge mu ni po teni shang loma zla tani teni nge sem te yang teni ti shang loma ti thola jagni o nge sem te yu mu te chu sam lo mambo mo tani nge shang loma ti thola sem te par jagni te jin dugna te la njokpa zigres.
So the first of these stages is called resting. And it's resting is like, for example, bringing my gaze to the leaf on this plant, and by concentrating on the leaf, I bring all of the other distracting thoughts in my mind into a state of rest.
Teni ngacho karti chorang nangbazginna teni nangba sarje ba teni pena sarje shakja ta ba ke thangkha o teni zngola jerne teni thangkha tela pena zhigang dan teni de ba de zhigang ze re yana chimbo ina zhigang chongchong ina sormo ji o teni ge che chongchong zu teni pena dingola jerne teni ni ge tela tani teni de gores nangbazginna.
If you're a Buddhist, you could perform this kind of practice by looking, fixing your gaze on a Buddha, a tanka of a Buddha, a tanka maybe the size of half an arm span, putting it in front of you and focusing on this.
Teni karte yeshi chuluk patin resina korang ke yeshi gdini kelatana chokore yana ti jadam te latana chokore shizja. Tela tana chokore zi tik tela tani tana pena jadam de ngol la jarni teni jadam go jumdo ti thola mugni po ti thola ta teni semyang ti thola par jarni teni tana chokore.
And if you were a Christian, you could do the same thing with picture of Jesus or with the cross by putting it in front of you and focusing on it with your 2 eyes and bringing your attention to this.
Teni kyorang karte tapa tsawani menken chulu kanga tapa yang menken tenisina ni kyorang ke changlo masik latana chokore jamba remo kang romas latana chokore tenis latana tin jugres.
And if you were a person of no particular religious faith at all, then you could do the same thing by looking at the leaf on a plant or by looking at any picture in general.
Teni tawi ni kamna ngaso teni mug ni po te kola targo re teni mug Zumdib mambo teni mambo nyangmare teni yarta marta mambo nyangmare mukti titola tan gore teni mugni pota tani teni semyang titola par jarne perna sanje shakja ta pa keina nda sanje gena sanje gentala di mensum dala tana chokore thgar la tana chokore otena sanje kala tana nda yeshi la tana nda jadam te la tana nda shangaloma la tana nda Gantar tini ngacu mugni potang tini semte tasakchi ketola tani tini yu ya yandro mandro moshe par tini chiketola par tani tini dgore tela semti tola njoze greze par njoze abena ngacu chinde tini di tola njoze ra da ngarang semti ti tola jagre ti tonda greze.
So regardless of what it is we are using as our object of concentration, of focus, whether it be a picture of the Buddha, an image of the Buddha, focusing on the spot between his eyes or at his heart, or whether it's a Christian some kind of Christian iconography or the leaf of a plant, what we need to do is focus our two eyes very in a very single-pointed way upon the object, not blinking, not looking around from left to right, and in so doing bringing our minds to rest on the object that we are looking at.
Yana pe na nga cho nyarji tawa zo gomna teni nga cho sem gna la nyarji chipo te gomne teni nam to jam me ba shine nga cho sem te nyarji ga to la par jerne teni nyarji chipo te sem gna la samna te la njog ba je gres.
And we can also refer to this kind of resting in terms of compassion meditation, where we focus our minds exclusively on compassion and generating compassion. We do not allow our minds to wander to other things. This is also a form of resting.
Teni semti tola jerne teni nam tong ramra mambo me ba shine teni jerne teni nipi ne kamna teni nga cho thomer teni lojong shi ne kamna jondor shi bi ne kamna yin rampon tu thop kamare je teni pe na karma shekhanda karma chingda yana karma ninda teni ma to yin rampon tu thop kamare je ti tola teni ma to tu thop kamare je.
But this first kind of, this first stage, resting, is not something that we will be able to sustain for a very long time when we first set out. Perhaps at the beginning we might only be able to do it for 30 seconds or a minute or a couple of minutes.
Teni njog matav zena kare zena tenga so sem kana la nam tok nam da mambo ki hong gare teni nyuk teni ta sa chila ta ne nyuk ta yo na sem ko teni duk mare teni sem ro re je teni sem jalan ro re teni yaram bun duk tab ko mare.
So when we say not being able to rest the mind, what we mean is that even though our eyes might still be focused on the object, our minds have wandered off in another direction.
And
when this happens, we then need the second method.
Ginzena gintani nepati gintani pena nga chi marshar ke na pena chi thupa chila ginze mareze chi mambo zindi te varma chatan ro na tini tela ginze gereze gintani ro atela zegere tindi indi nga cho pena sem te tini ti thola jare na tini korang janzla sona yang la yang shadong ti thola phar ja gore ti thola gintani ne gore tela ginjo ko zegereze.
And so this second approach that we take is called continual resting. It's like a drop of water. We can't talk about it being water in any kind of continuous sense, but when we have lots of drops together, like a river, then we can call this continuous or continual. So what this refers to is bringing our minds back to the object of focus when they wander.
Teni genjok zigiti teni tondak tanga so kowa tab debo zig toni shana gin machet per nepatela zigresi gin machet per neparezi pena nga so tangbo nga so teni nyaji gomyona teni yang namtok jambazi yoni nyaji mayimba mambo sem kana la kesona ti gin chaparezi o tendi mayimbar nyaji te pena karma nga karma ch tendi kana la nyaji takda gin machet yongwa tendi zila zigresi genjok zigiti tendi zigresi.
So this continual resting refers to not breaking our concentration in our meditation. So, for example, when meditating on compassion, after 5 or 10 minutes, our thoughts might wander off elsewhere. So the continual resting is really referring to establishing or maintaining a continual focus on our object.
Teni ti kapsanga so ginthat ne gona te haleba kamu yoreze haleba kamu yore nga so le tambu pazina ginthat ne thamkamare chawane ne thamkamare.
However, at the beginning in particular, doing this is extremely difficult and is probably not something, in fact, we'll be able to do.
Yina te kyongmare nga so mumtni jondrshini karte tini nga so ti kirmajna jondrshina kale gin yaram borambo ne thamyongore tambu te thamkamare da.
However, it is something that if we persist in our practice, if we persevere, that we gradually will be able to achieve.
Teni ti kapsa teni ngaso semna la chapjukshi gubi tontak chigyo rezi ti kapsa.
And at this time, there is something that we need to mentally prepare for ourselves.
Pena rungo lanzang kanga runzak teni lister bazginna teni korang ka semla chapjuk go rezi ta korang teni rungo lanjona kabli mambo jab go re samji teni chapjuk tu korang ka sem kana la yor go rezi pena tin rawaz ka ngaso semna la chapjuk go rezi.
So when we talk about mentally preparing, it's like a mountaineer who's going to scale the peak of a mountain. Before he or she does this, she needs to mentally acknowledge that the difficulties that they are likely to endure.
Teni pena ngaso namgin ngaso choa ganala gum marja pine kamna ngaso sem kana nam tongja manja mambo yong yoreta yona te ngaso hako yo mareze.
Usually in the course of our everyday existences, all kinds of discursive thoughts and distracting thoughts arise in our minds, but this is not something for the most part that we are aware of.
Teni tanga so gum jabjati teni ha lepa nam to chimang song pe na so teni namgin gum magi piner ke le teni chik teni ninjir samjir jinjir ke teni nam to chimang la swa dawo teni nawas yongres.
However, when we first begin to practice meditation, it seems that these kinds of thoughts are in actual fact like they're multiplying in number.
Teni ti kapsa teni ngaso mambo zke teni simla teni country samro rezena o tangi gum jabna yakpo yong samare nge gum jabda teni ta gum tham samare ngarang ta gum yo samare ngarang la le tang karwa yo samare samni teni para yujak rezi ti kapsa mambo zke.
And it's at this point that many people become discouraged, feel that they are not able to persist in meditation, that they're not going to achieve good results, that they're not really cut out for it, and on this basis abandon their practice.
Teni te ngaso le tang karwa yo me ke tondak mareze te ngaso jongder ke teni to Shamatha pi jimsen jire ma to ba teni ngaso karwa me pi jimsen ji mare mo changma la teni re ma to ngaso moschu dani teni yeng mareze.
But this really isn't a case of not having the good karma for meditation or otherwise not being cut out for it. In fact, every single person is like this. This kind of mental occurrence is the rule for every individual.
Di kapsa tini ngaso kari samko rezena o ta nga nam to haleba mambo tindi kegen duta yina nge nam to jemang mareze ngama ngaso chowa nangla gum marji pine kamna dindi nam tok mambo yong yore taron dali jang mang yore ta ti kapsangi dang ma jip re nge samlo ma tang wi jimsin ji ma shi pare ta nge gum jab pine kamna ngarang la nam tok kandi mambo yo ba de ngarang ga shi song are ma to ba nam tok je mang sa song ma re samni dindi sam go res.
What we need to tell ourselves at this moment is not that our discursive thoughts are increasing or multiplying, but rather that before we began to meditate and observe our minds, we in fact had no idea about the nature of our discursive thoughts or even that we had them at all. So really what we are experiencing is an observation of the discursive thoughts we had in any case and not their multiplication or increase.
Tani ti kapsa ngacho rang la senso she go re je senso she ne o ta kyong mare ta nam tok mambo ndu ta ti kyong mare nge nam tok ta jimang lan ro mare jinyong lan ro re o dindi ne kabla ta mus ta se na le tangbo pi kapsa ta nam tok mambo yo re ti kyong mare nge yin da manda tani gum go sam ne ti kapsa tini sam go re.
And so we need to comfort ourselves at this point, recognizing that our discursive thoughts are not multiplying, that they will get less, and that we need to persist in our practice.
Teni ngaso teni tari ngaso tapsi khsum yopinan ka nipati tere tine kamna jini ki ngaso gintne gin rambo she etamato targoze hajang rambo she tab mare ta karma ni da sam nga da tindi kanala gin machal par teni ngaso teni sim tindi ne tomato targo res.
So this is the second stage of this practice, continual resting, which refers to the being able to focus, to concentrate on our object for an extended period of time. At the beginning, it won't be for very long, maybe only a couple of minutes, but this is the second stage.
Tani ta tabshik samba dereze. Tabshik samba tila lan tin jokba zgereze. Lan tin jokba zena lan zena kang zena pena nge tangbo tini nyangji rapozu gom yona tini ngaranga semte tini jamba zla sone nyangji mayimba tini tondak mepa ndra mepa tomi kshawa mambo semkanala tini sam yongreze. Ti sambi ne kamna nge yang ngaranga semte laryang shir yongne nyangji ga thola paran jokore tela lanze na yangkir ti thola paran jokore o tela lantin jok bazegres.
So this third stage is repeated resting, which refers to bringing our mind back to our object of concentration after it has wandered away. So as if we were doing meditation on compassion, if our minds were to go off onto somewhere else, repeated here refers to that repeated action of again bringing our mind back to our object of focus.
Teni ti kapsa tini ulan tin jok pazi tin jok gona ngachola ti kapsa tini tornang shi go ani yoze ti kapsa.
In bringing our attention back, there are two things that we need to keep in mind.
Tornang shi go sa tangbo de kangrezina ngacho sim te pena nyangji tangbo ngacho nyangji gom go yona teni ta khorang nyangji maim ba tondak jamba zu pena ngarang chumsang go tondak ra boda yana chung japje teni ji khepsang go tondak ra bo teni jamba zu sam go yona teni lamsang teni ngarang ga hako go re ongni nyangji gom go mdu ngarang ga jamba zu sam go ndu sambate lamsang shi go res.
So the first thing that we need to keep in mind, or the first thing we need to do when our minds wander, so say we are meditating on compassion, the moment that we realize our mind has wandered off, perhaps thinking about something to do with our families or maybe our business or something like that, what we need to be able to do is immediately recognize that our minds have wandered off. This recognition that our mind has wandered is important.
Teni kartite mashina pena ngaranga tangbo nyangji gom go na ta nga semti nyangji mugumni teni tondak jambaz teni samlo tang teni she ko je ta ngaranga hama ko na teni nga chu karma ch teni ga nala teni namtok nyangji sawani gom ko mare korang ka jambaz sam ko yore ta ina ngi teni simla dagbo magimni teni tichu mambo cholak tang res.
If we're not able to recognize when our minds wander off, then it may in fact be the case that while we are sitting down meditating, as it would seem on compassion, our minds have actually gone off somewhere else, and maybe for even 5 or 10 minutes at one time. And this is a great waste of time in our practice.
Tindi yendi tini ngatso tini nge pena ngaranga tangbo nyangji gomgo na tani ta nyangji maim baz tini semgana la tini chanyuna Titi lamsang tini hako go reze lamsang o ngi nyarji mayim baz ngi nyangji gung madu ngarang ka jambaz sa samlo tang ndu samni lamsang chang go re ti tondak tangbo res.
So the first thing is this immediate recognition that we are no longer concentrating on what we are intending to concentrate on. I'm meant to be concentrating on compassion, but I'm no longer doing that. I'm thinking about something else. This is what we need to train ourselves to recognize.
Tini tondak nipa te gang reze na Teni pena tadi nyarji gom go yona tata ngaranga sem go nyarji mugumne teni koranga jambaz sam go yona tengi shisongna teni shipatamji choko mareze ta Shamatha teni korang semti sirch yong go re sirch ne nyarji go thola par jerne o mentni nyarji go thola teni tan jog go re no tela lantin jog ba zegre yangkir nyarji go thola par teni jerne teni she go re te tonda ni bares.
Simply knowing or recognizing, however, that our minds have wandered off is not enough. What we need to do after we realize that this is happening is bring our minds back to our object of focus. And it's this bringing of the mind back that we are talking about with repeated resting.
Tani tenji go ni tani yang rambola kale jongdrshe go re nga so simtela jongdrshe atela hachanga thapsi go re pe na nga so tendro jongdrshe na pe na ta tini to khalo ti bandao lambo chi tini drjong ze re tenji she bandao to so la tini thapsi go re tendra wo she nga so sim tini jongdrshe go na kale tini thapsi go ni jongdrshe go re.
So we need to train our minds using an approach and a method like this, just as we would train or tame an animal like a horse or an elephant, so too do we need to train our minds.
Teni thapsi te la teni kale teni nga so semte halipa pe na nga so chisu shekanda ota karma nyesheta teni nga la nin sim chig thola pe na nyang ji gomna nyang chi kyangba ma to ba jang musamba da teni yang karte nyang ji ma gomne nga so jirni nda bo gomna sem gna la teni chisu shekanda chisu chingda teni gna la teni nam to jamba chig me ba shini teni ha chang teni jewa teni gna la ne tham kres.
And if we apply this approach, then it will be possible for us to, for a period of 20 minutes or half an hour, to remain in concentration on our particular object of meditation, whether it be compassion or whether it be a shamatha practice. We will be able to remain in a state of single-pointed concentration on our object of meditation.
Then Jamcho na long jamni tini ralub chimbo yongo yowi kapsa tini long temar me pare sona tini jamcho ngola lab me patini jamcho ngo par tini to lab chichi me patini demo rendo re pena tinda bore ne semte par demo rendo res. And
this will enable us to bring a great peace to our minds, just as an ocean, when there's a great wind blows and then the waves churn up and it's very violent and choppy. When the wind subsides, then so too do the waves, and the ocean face becomes very calm. We can achieve the same result with our minds.
Teni kartenga su nimare la teni karma nyeshendao chisu shekanda chisu chingda teni rela teni gomthap sona teni ngasu sem kanala yo piteni dungor mambota teni non shikta teni tongser kana tawan rawota to so chama teni tin mebashin rawres.
And if we can persevere in this kind of practice daily for 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour, then much of our mental suffering, our pressure, depression, etc. can really be reduced.
Then robi gimsen ta kangrezena teni ngaso tongser kana diennanda teni ononshigena sem marke payenanda teso thamchipo ngaso sem ganala teni namtong ramada mambo hajang mambo kini teni tindi samlo dugbo mambo tang teni shipi gimsenji teni to sem marke pa chakbares.
And the reason that this kind of approach is effective for feelings of unhappiness or stress or depression is that in fact these mental states emerge from our minds.
Ate sem namtok mambo kivjak pi gimsenji sem marke pa sonwarese. Sem namtok mambo kivjak pi gimsenji sem marke pa sonwarese.
Yes, so it's a result that these states are brought about due to the fact that our minds are generating a lot of negative thoughts, and these are responsible for the suffering in our minds.
Tani tal namtok te so tamchepo me parende tini sem jeware soine kamna tini jewati nala dungur chigya yo mare jewati nala dungur yo mare tini jewati te ti nala yrambo da one thamna tini dungur samati nala jine pena namkhane khawa bavna so nala khawa bavna tini so nala khawa bavna so nani tini shirendo re pena tinda bores.
And if we can maintain this practice or extend this practice over a period of time, then the sufferings in our mind will cease to exist, like snow falling into a lake that simply melts away. So it will be when negative thoughts arise in our minds.
Teni tingani teni nyangje tang teni sem kebo da teni yonga teni sem hachang kebo yonga tang teni sem kana la nyar je tang to so yak po ki ni tin je yong gres.
And with this state, then compassion and the nyungjiedang.
Nyar je ki gre te sem ki po yong gres.
Oh, but that we will be able to generate compassion well, and our minds will generate happiness.
Ota tinji indi teni nga so gum tambo te tere te tarong te la jipcha she go re nge terang sha chi tum dor di tambo zre jipcha te so teni re choran so namba ga teni jong la teni tarong jmo ta ne teni she na teni ti na la gum tham ram ra ha le ba mambo ndu te so kang gum na chokore te la tarong jipcha te go re.
So this first type of the first kind of meditation that I've described today has just been a very brief and simple introduction. The Buddhist tradition offers much more detailed instructions on how to engage in this kind of meditation, and if this is something that you are interested in pursuing, then the Buddhist tradition offers more detailed descriptions on how this can be done.
Teni gum te teni soso teni pecha tani soso yige tani gumna yangbo yong mare te inna mana te la gum par chengkeng ge gergen zu go re se teni gergen khorang la inna teni gum gyab ya ge nyamyong yangbo yong keng ge teni gergen zu ge teni par lob go re se teni tin samne nga so rang ge lobjong yangbo shi chai ji se teni rang ge teni rang ge chimni gumna teni zhe ge.
It's usually not effective for us to simply learn meditation by reading books ourselves and sort of self-teaching, as it were. In order to practice well, we need to have a meditation teacher who has achieved some experience themselves. And after we have learnt well under their instruction, then we can continue with this practice in our own homes.
Teni goni gum nyamnyong yong kan teni zika teni chidna teni ranga gum te kale yajin jo rezi tambo nga so pena gum nyima chingda zankur chingda teni zila gum jabna ti nala yaji chimbo drogo mare ta te kyo mare kale drogo re nga so jang rambo la ta go re ma to nga so zankur chingda bola gum ni te yakbo mayona o tangi gum shi samare samne yug jagna tin jika mare jin chung go rezi.
So under this proper instruction, gradually our meditation will progress. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 1 week. We need to persist in our practice. It's not something that we should cast aside because we don't feel we've got immediate results with.
And
this is the first kind of meditation that we're going to talk about today.
This
kind of meditation is called Shamatha. The second kind of meditation today, due to time, I'm probably not going to be able to talk about in great detail, but what it is a meditation that is based on the calmness that we've established with the first kind of meditation, looking at the essence of the heart, and not the heart of the mind, and understanding, in fact, what the nature of the mind really is.
And the
benefit of understanding or knowing the nature of the mind is that all of our sufferings, whether great or small, in fact, originate from not knowing this. So this involves us appreciating that all of our happiness or attachments or unhappinesses are in fact just like dreams.
Teni mulum atawas teni shisona teni ngaso pena mulum ganala mulum yeba shisona dungur me pandrawo reyongres.
And upon knowing this, it's just like discovering in a dream that one is simply just having a dream.
Yena tine kamna ngaso nyarji teni yarji sindore nyarji kena teni chokore ngaso njikchakta teni khongchoda teni tso me parindore ta yena nyarji ndawota tso sama yarji chevzang dores.
But our compassion will increase, continue to increase and to develop. Our negative emotions, our suffering, our fear, etc., these will disappear.
Teni ti kapsang aso teni rangdu kasamlo mamboda, teni khungchoda, khunzanda, teni tadrig teni ta nyomomba sama meba chakares.
And at this point, our various negative feelings of resentment and anger, etc., will subside.
Teni nyarji yarji song jimsenji teni tina kamna aso manamla teni phamba mambo drib kare, teni jampan tela teni ta leka ta drib kares.
Nyungje teni.
Nyarji ki jimsenji jampan ji leka legres.
And the reason that our compassion continues to develop is that we are engaging, or that we are working for the benefit of others.
Teni jampang leka ta mambo lena teni tina ne soso ranga teni matse tondang dambarin dores.
And when we do a lot of work for the benefit of others, then our life becomes very meaningful.
Teni matse tondang dambare patang tedang nyamde teni soso ranga dewa tang kepang ngomata ngaso te jampang dribna tinang ne yongres.
And while our life is in addition to our lives becoming more meaningful, we realize that true happiness and joy, in fact, is derived from benefiting and helping others.
Teni ngaso jantun dribata jampan dribala teni shongwi dewate teni dewa ngomate rese tondang dambi dewate rese.
So this happiness that is derived from helping others is ultimate happiness.
Teni terang ngaso shito teni chachat teni ngaso shatsarso teni tsamaga tarong yang jivchashini lojong yakbo shini teni gomjabro chis teni jambachi me sama yakbo nyansong tji chis.
And that brings to an end this afternoon's teaching. May everybody study well and meditate well. Thank you all for listening.